everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Gregorian. I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. I want to welcome you to today's meeting. I especially want to welcome all of our DEC members and then encourage those of you who are not to become one. There's terrific benefits, and you can do so right at econclub.org. I would ask you as we get started today just to silence your cell phone so we do not disturb today's program. And one of the many traditions of DEC meetings is we always begin by honoring our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would ask you to stand and join me, and the flag is to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as our invocation today will be delivered by Friar Brother Dan Crosby from the Capuchin St. Bonaventure Monastery.
Loving Creator God, look upon us gathered here before you today. You have brought us together from many ethnic and religious backgrounds, but all of us are united as your equally beloved sons and daughters. We are also united in our love for and commitment to our city and our country. As we gather 1 week before our elections, we pray that you give us wisdom to choose leaders who will truly care for all your people as you do. Leaders who will enhance our efforts to make our state and country a place of freedom, peace, and equal opportunity for everyone. As our blessed Father Solanus Casey would say, we thank you ahead of time for the blessings you have in store for all of us. Grant us this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Crosby. You may all please be seated. So as many of you are aware, we love to have students at Detroit Economic Club meetings. Today is no exception. We were lucky enough to bring 80 high school and college students today. I want to take a minute to tell you who was lucky enough to spend some time with our guest speaker today at a student reception. So if you wouldn't mind, just hold your applause quick. But we've got students today from Dryden High School, thanks to Urban Science. Students from Macomb Community College, thank you, Abby, and the great folks at Raymond. University of Windsor, thank you to Ranjit and Meredith from Lee Hecht Harrison. And they were especially generous because they also brought Riverview Community High School to the DEC today, so thank you guys twice. Melvindale Cardinals, thanks to Kendra and Accenture. Detroit Collegiate Prep, Kevin and the great folks at Kelly Services. AGBU Manugian, thank you to Ryan and the great folks at Grant Thornton. And Lawrence Tech University students, thank you to Borg Warner. So, ladies and gentlemen, how about a round of applause to welcome our students and thank their sponsors. Two things on your table really quickly. Take a look at our sponsor brochure. We would not be here today if it wasn't for the generosity of our corporate sponsors. We've got about 120 or so. We'd love to add you to that mix. If you are one of the sponsored companies, we thank you for your support. There's great benefits if you're not, and I'd be happy to talk with you offline. Also on your table is our season lineup. So we hope you can be with us at a couple of our upcoming events. And we just announced yesterday that we were honored to be able to host the gubernatorial candidates. On October 31st, we'll be at the Motor City Casino Soundboard. We hope you can be there. And also on December 5th, Jim Lentz from Toyota North America will be with us. And I can promise you we've got a couple of real blockbusters coming in the month of November. Watch your email. I think we'll have some fun in November as well. If you're a tweeter, we encourage you to tweet today using @DebtEconomicClub. You can join the conversation using #EconClub. And from time to time, I want to highlight the incredible history of Detroit Economic Club speakers. Today is one of those days. Mr. De Sousa, October 23rd is a very popular date in DEC's 84-year history. There's been 15 other speakers at our podium on this day in 84 years. Let me share just a few highlights. 1944, Chinese nationalist minister Yu Luan. 1973, Admiral Thomas Moore, Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. 1984, Secretary of the Treasury Donald Regan. 1989, Congressman from Georgia, you might have heard of him, Newt Gingrich, right here on our stage. 2006, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and locally, just 5 years ago, we held our mayoral debate between current Mayor Mike Duggan and Sheriff Benny Napoleon. So today we're pleased to add you, Mr. De Sousa, as our 16th speaker on this day in Detroit Economic Club history. And one of the more popular elements before I leave the stage is our Q&A session. So Mr. De Sousa has agreed at the end of the program to answer your toughest questions. There's instructions on your table. You submit those via your smartphone, and those questions will make their way to our presiding officer, who I'm about to put to work. Meredith Krupik is the Senior Vice President for Michigan for Hecht Harrison. She is a Detroit Economic Club board member and a very generous friend to the Detroit Economic Club. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meredith Krupik.
Thank you, Steve. I would like to take a moment to thank Steve Gregorian and the amazing Detroit Economic Club staff that has been so supportive in making this a great day today and a wonderful meeting, especially moving a venue with less than 24 hours. You guys are truly fantastic, so thank you so much. I would also like to thank the MGM Grand Hotel for quickly accommodating us, and especially all of you in the audience. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm really glad that you found your way to your seat here. We are really glad you could join us for a really important conversation. I am pleased to introduce Ranjit De Sousa, President of Hecht Harrison, one of the world's largest human capital companies, specializing in helping organizations transform their greatest asset, their workforce. A Swiss national, Ranjit has extensive global experience, including working in the US, France, the UK, Germany, and Switzerland, where LHH is headquartered. During his tenure in all those countries, Ranjit developed a deep understanding of human capital challenges facing today's largest companies, and a fluency in the realities of workforce transformation. He served as the executive sponsor for LHH's own digital transformation initiative, as well as he served as a board member of the World Employment Confederation. During his career, he has counseled some of the world's largest organizations, including several auto manufacturers. Ranjit holds degrees in economics, law, and political science, and served in the Swiss military within the reconnaissance troop, and later as an instructor in the Swiss Officers School. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm Detroit welcome to Ranjit.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Meredith, for the very warm introduction. Thank you, Steve. It's a great honor to be here, especially when I hear of the illustrious predecessors here on this podium. To the topic. Recently, a team of computer scientists at the University of Stanford announced that they had developed an AI-driven program which identifies pneumonia in chest x-rays more accurately than a human being than a human doctor. So if you are a radiologist, what are you thinking now? Are you going to lose your job? Maybe sooner than later? And if you're a patient, would you rather have the more accurate AI-driven program identify the pneumonia, or would you want a human looking at your chest X-ray? And I think the even more important question, which we might want to ask ourselves, is if a radiologist, with all their education, 4 years of undergrad school, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of radiology residency, can be outgunned by AI, what is going to happen to all of us, all the sophisticated things we are doing? So selfishly, let me start with myself. My son asked me the other day, "Daddy, what do you do all day?" Well, I give speeches from time to time, but mostly I'm in meetings. So what do you do in those meetings? I listen, mostly. I listen. Well, can't Alexa and Siri do listening too? Probably a lot more focus and never getting tired. So can I be replaced by a robot? So yes, I think you get the picture. There's a lot of change coming. But the change might not be happening quite the way that you might believe it's going to be taking place. So let's go back to those radiologists for a moment. In the United States, every year, there are 60 billion X-rays done every year. That's one X-ray every 2 seconds for every human radiologist. How can you ever be accurate or deal with all that information? I'm sure all of you are also dealing with similar situations in your jobs, in your lines of business. And it bears out also in the data. If you think of all the information, all the data that humanity has generated throughout history, 90% of the data has been generated just in the last 2 years. Just think of that. So you've got so much information. You've got this avalanche of data. Wouldn't that be a possibility where AI could actually help us in our jobs, could actually help us get to better outcomes, to be more productive? Well, that's not the feeling that people have out there. There's a lot of anxiety today as industry after industry goes through disruption. And in this context, it's only natural that all the press, the media, would really focus on the threat that AI poses, the advent of the robots. How many jobs will be taken away? How many livelihoods will be replaced by a machine which is more productive, which walks a lot faster, actually generates better profit margins, and as a side benefit, never takes sick leave? You would think that's kind of obvious. But spending my time with a lot of our largest customers, global brands, global companies, that's not what I'm hearing. That's not what they are really being challenged with. They're worried about other things, not about replacing human beings necessarily with machines. So what are their concerns? What are they worried about? Well, there are 3 big trends, 3 big challenges that they're dealing with. And let me go through these challenges quickly, briefly. First, there are too many jobs out there. That might sound a little counterintuitive. There are too many jobs out there. There are not enough of people to fill all those jobs. 90% of organizations have skill gaps. They don't have the skills to actually get the job done. So we have huge talent shortages. Second, there is an increasing speed, but also an increasing scope of innovation. And companies are challenged in how to actually deal with that innovation. How are they supposed to integrate that into their business processes? How are they going to build up the capabilities to actually benefit from AI? Otherwise, a lot of machine learning, digitalization is just going to be hype. So that's the second big challenge I keep on hearing. And then thirdly, there is an imperative to radically reskill. It's not just technology which is changing. Markets are changing very, very rapidly, and companies have a hard time keeping up with that. Companies, their workforce, are having a hard time keeping up with that. So how do you reskill people? How do you retrain people? How do you retool individuals quickly enough in order to be able to keep up with the pace of change? So I think we can all agree with the central idea that there is a lot of change going on. Now, do we like that change? I think there is this wonderful old saying that the only people who crave change are wet babies. So if you think of yourself, at an individual level, not just the organization, the demands for retraining constantly, adapting constantly, that is what is going to create the biggest stress, a lot more than the threat of job loss. You're going to have to adapt on an ongoing basis, and the most flexible will win. So that is what is really going to create anxiety. And I think that is something we as organizations, as leaders, cannot minimize. But let me dig a little deeper when talking about these different trends. And let me start off with the trend of radical reskilling. So if you think of banks, right, you think of the bank mobile apps, you think of the robo-advisors, you would think that banks soon won't be needing any branches anymore. They won't be needing any bank tellers anymore. And if you look at the data, in the last decade, 10,000 branches have closed in the United States. 10,000 branches, that averages out to roughly 3 branches a day. And obviously, customers love using their mobile apps, they love using the robo-advisors, but just until they have a really difficult financial question. And then people want to talk to a human being. They want to get true advice. So what is happening right now in the banking industry? While banks are reopening branches, they do have robot greeters at the door. It's kind of cool. But when people actually have the more detailed questions, they are directed by those robot greeters to a bank teller who has been retrained. A bank teller who can give you advice about how to take out a loan, maybe start up your own business. A bank teller has become a financial coach. And so a lot of banks are retraining their bank tellers. They're retraining them. A bank I recently spoke to has introduced a certified digital banker course for their employees. So I think the smart money out there is on, yes, some bank tellers losing their jobs, but a lot more bank tellers actually being retrained and reskilled. Now, take the second trend, the increasing speed and scope of innovation. Well, the auto industry is a brilliant example. You have autonomous driving, and when I speak to a lot of automotive execs, they tell me, look, in a couple of years, we are no longer going to be selling to individual owners. We're going to be actually having ride-sharing platforms. We're going to be rental platforms. We're going to have Uber type of options. So what does that mean for the automotive industry, the people working in the automotive industry? What does it mean for tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, and all the ecosystem around that you have here, for example, in Detroit or the Midwest? I was speaking to a CHRO of a very large European automaker, and he was telling me over lunch that, it's great, Ranjit, you guys support us in a lot of the restructuring and transformation that is going on in our production sites. But I need you to solve a very different problem for me. I need you to help me hire data scientists. I cannot find these data scientists. I have all these open positions out there. So a huge amount of innovation which is going on in the automotive industry. But some of the impact is going to be felt in very different industries. So in a meeting recently with 2 CEOs of insurance companies, they told me that their biggest concern was around the auto insurance business. And that business might actually be completely disrupted because it's no longer going to be individual owners buying out auto insurance. They're going to have to deal with big corporate companies like a GM or a Ford. So the innovation which is being driven here in Detroit might be felt in a completely different industry a lot more strongly. And then lastly, the topic of skill shortages and what impact that has. Let's talk about the airline industry. So if you think of the airline industry, yes, there's autonomous flying. And I don't know if any of you have been to Dubai recently. So you've got these pretty cool pilotless autonomous flying taxis. So I don't know if that's going to be coming soon to any other big city, but amazing. So clearly you have the advent of autonomous flying. But if you talk to executives in the airline industry, their biggest problem is a different one. Their biggest problem is the retirement of pilots and the issue that they cannot replace all those pilots who are retiring. So maybe, and this is where technology could again be a game changer, maybe those pilotless planes might be coming just at the right moment to fill that skill shortage, that gap that you're actually seeing. So in essence, the talent shortage that you're seeing across many different industries, the talent shortage that many automotive makers just here in Detroit are seeing, that is changing the situation for companies and is a challenge for companies equally important, maybe even more important than the robots and the advent of AI. So let's talk about that global talent shortage in a little more detail. The prediction is that in 10 years, we will be having a skill shortage of 85 million people. You're talking of 20 million people more than the population of the entire Midwest. Just think of the number. And right now, there are 3 industries, this is happening right now, there are 3 industries which are having to tackle massive skill shortages: the automotive industry, manufacturing more generally. Again, maybe a little counterintuitively, and not necessarily what you read in the press. Banks and insurances, we just spoke of them. And also the high-tech industry. Now, our client Intel, reacting to that skill shortage, has decided to relax the requirements for hiring software engineers. And a lot of other companies are doing exactly that. They're changing the hiring criteria. They're trying to widen the pool of talent to bring into their company. For example, the requirement of having 3 or more years of experience, not necessarily any more relevant. Having the need to have a college degree to get a banking job, many banks don't have the requirement anymore. So you've just opened up probably about 1 million jobs out there to a much bigger and much wider talent pool. And still, the skill shortages persist. So simple question for leaders, for organizations like you here today, for ourselves is, are we ready for the future? Are we really ready to deal with these challenges? So one of the things I need to do is to take the mirror and look at our own industry. Our own industry, the HR services industry, has undergone massive change. Think of just LinkedIn. Everybody's using LinkedIn. Think of virtual career fairs. Many people don't go to a physical career fair anymore. Think about chatbots. Think about all these other technologies impacting the recruitment process, hiring, development, learning. So, quick show of hands. Who of you has hired a new team member in the, say, last 12 months? The majority of the room. A little more people here than there. So, who thought this was a very tedious process? So maybe you got to meet Ella. So Ella is a chatbot that we have developed, And she is a perfect example of how artificial intelligence might be impacting the workforce, the workplace, but in a very different way than you might be reading of in the press. So what does Ella do? Ella sorts through huge amounts of data to help a person in job search select the right jobs, figure out how to apply for those jobs. It recommends where a person should be searching for a job. Now, why is that a huge added value? Well, one of the big issues in recruiting is that you've got this huge amount of resumes on the one side, and you've got this job opportunity here. And how do you match those candidates, those people, those resumes with those job opportunities? Typically, this has been a manual job. It's tedious, it is error-prone, and it is not free from bias. So clearly, that is something which maybe, yes, definitely, AI can solve. AI can help make hiring fairer. Now, if we speak to our customers, 2/3 of companies are planning to use AI to make the recruitment process fairer, faster, more effective. Why is that? And is AI the only solution to getting to a better recruiting process? Well, machines are significantly better in figuring out which candidate fits for a job position and serving up a number of job candidates who fit that profile. Again, think of the huge amounts of data. But it's not only about AI or the machine. At the end of the day, you're going to have to check for cultural fit. You're going to have to check whether that candidate or those candidates are going to work out in a day-to-day setting. And that's where the human brings value into the process. So if I go back to that question that my son was asking me, Daddy, what do you do all day? Maybe I need to adapt my answer. Well, I'm in meetings, I'm listening, but I'm also empathizing, I'm being creative, I'm brainstorming, and I'm trying to draw a picture of the future. And I think that's a great summary in trying to understand how machines and human beings can work together. The machines are great at winnowing through all those resumes we were speaking of, but then you need human beings at the last stretch, bringing in that empathy, that creativity, and drawing the picture of the future. So, what does that mean for companies? As organizations are faced with this change, we need to actually think about not replacing machines, human beings by machines. We need to think about how we can proactively approach this problem. We need to think about how we can help people, individuals, workplaces, which are grappling with the task of moving at pace. And yes, we need to convince our leaders that it's worth investing into doing so, investing now. So if you look at some of these stats, there are huge benefits of having an up-to-date, skilled workforce. And there are huge benefits of ensuring that you engage and do not lose your employees. So just to mention one stat here, the cost of replacement of a skilled worker can reach up to 200% of that employee's salary. That alone should be an argument enough. So clearly, you need a recipe. Right? What do we do to solve for this issue? We at LHH, we believe there are 4 things that you can be doing. The first one is ignite the employability of your employees, all your employees. So what does it mean? What can organizations do to help in the career development, in the reskilling, upskilling of the employees on an ongoing basis, and making sure that all employees have access to those capabilities? Let me give you an example. At Booz Allen Hamilton, we've been working with them to upskill 5,000 analysts with data science capabilities. Now, that is not necessarily an immediate need that Booz Allen has right now, but they know that both for the flexibility of the organization and the employability needs of their analysts, this is a great investment. Now, at a more strategic level, companies also need to think of future-proofing their workforce. What does that mean? That means understanding where your future product areas are going to be. What are the business outcomes that you're going to be having in 5 years? And then thinking of what skills you need for that. Mapping out today's skills and actually helping your people reskill to get to that point which you will be needing in 5 years. Let's take Procter & Gamble, traditional consumer goods company. They have a big marketing department with very traditional marketeers. Now, these marketeers need to be moved into the new world of programmatic marketing, analytical marketing. We've been working with them in reskilling them in that direction, giving them the data and digital marketing tools within the space of maybe 6 months in order to become digital marketers. Now, not everybody is going to make that shift, but the majority of the folks can actually do that. Now, sometimes you have big changes in organizations which you need to apply very quickly. And one of the things which we need to be doing a lot more, which organizations need to be focused on a lot more, is redeploying people much faster. So what does that mean? Take Capital One. Capital One has a lot of liberal arts grads who you don't want to actually lay off. You want to actually be able to use them in other places where Capital One is seeing a lot of growth. We've been working with Cap One for probably the last decade, and we help them reskill these folks, redeploy them, and to do so, we need to identify who has the ability and the attitude, despite maybe a liberal arts background, to become a data scientist, as an example. And then finally, yes, as a company, as an organization, you're going to have to lay off people. We were talking about the bank tellers earlier. So you're going to have to optimize the placement process. You're going to have to ensure that you give the people who you are exiting out of the organization the skills to land a new job much more quickly. Again, let me take an example. One of our insurance clients here in the United States just laid off 360 tech employees. Now, in the past, these tech employees would have actually gotten a bit of support, but they would have been pretty much left to their own devices and finding a new job. Now, this insurance company has done something different. They've partnered with us to take these individuals through a 14-week coding school. Now, again, not everybody will end up with great coding skills, but many of them will, and they will have massively increased the probability that they're going to land a good job. So again, there is a lot of change. There are ways to tackle this change. But is this unprecedented change? Of course, emotionally, and if you think of what you're reading in the press, there's a lot of anxiety. But let's think back to 1890. In 1890, half of the population in the United States was working in farming. 100 years later, 1990, only 3% were working in farming. I know that's not the right math, but you didn't have 47% unemployment. So let me take a different example. When I was a student at college, I earned a bit of money working in an IT help desk in a large corporation. And one of the most common things that, and I was basically the bottom of the food chain, right? So the most common thing I had to do was to help executives switch on their computers. Can you imagine anybody here needing help today to switch on their laptop? So what I'm trying to say here is we've been there before. We've been through massive changes before. And we have actually broken through the new frontier, as many people are calling these technological changes. But I think there is one aspect which I do want to mention here, which has changed. And that is the pace of life has accelerated. And this is great evidence for that, especially when you think of organizational life cycles. So back in the 1960s, a company spent roughly 70 years on average in the S&P 500. That number is down to 18 years today. And if you take the Fortune 500 list right now, half of those companies will be out of the Fortune 500 list in less than a decade. So yes, there is huge amount of change. I think one of the best examples I've personally seen of companies dealing or not dealing with that kind of change is Nokia. So I'm sure many of you, like me, had a Nokia cell phone. Nokia dominated the cell phone industry. And one of my first jobs, I was working up in Finland with the Nokia executives. And they thought their reign was going to last another 100 years. They never, in their hardware world, they never thought of the software, app-driven, smartphone-driven world that Apple was going to build, that Apple was building right under their noses. So where is Nokia now? Their challenge was not just the technological change. Their challenge was that they were not able to reskill their people. They weren't able to shift their workforce. They did not know which skills they actually will be needing in 5 years, 10 years from now. So, in essence, I think if we as leaders of big organizations, small organizations, if we care about employment, if we care about our companies and what our companies are going to look like in the future, but also if we care about society more broadly and the value of work in society, then we need to be more proactive about the topic of reskilling, retooling people, about the topic of shifting our skills in our workforce. We got to ignite the employability in our people. We got to actually think about future-proofing our workforce. We got to prepare to redeploy folks, and we got to think about when we exit people, how do we actually help them in getting connected to jobs a lot more quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit. That was wonderful. And I have the pleasure of some questions. I have the iPad here that have been taking questions in, so we'll get some questions from the audience. And then at the end, we'll do kind of a get to know you kind of lightning round of questions,
Sure.
if that's good. Okay. So one of the questions is it plausible that actual job interviews will be conducted by robots?
Great question. There's stuff out there. I don't know if some of you have seen, companies like HireVue who are doing interviews completely virtually, right, with facial recognition. A lot of this works, again, to winnow down those resumes and winnow down the panel of candidates that you want to be looking at. And, it can ensure, again, taking out bias. But I have a strong belief, we have a strong belief that it's not going to be replaced in that very last step. It's not going to be replacing human beings.
Okay, all right, wonderful. So there are a lot of corporate leaders in the room, and what steps should they be taking right now to prepare for the change and whether AI will impact them or not?
Yeah, great question. And coming back to what I was speaking of earlier, I think you need to be operating at two levels. There is a strategic level, where you really need to be thinking of, what are the business outcomes in probably a 5-year period that you need to be achieving? How is the business going to shift? What products are end of life? What are products which are going to have strong growth? And think about the skills you need for that. And then think of, where do you want to actually be strategically reskilling people, redeploying people? But at the same time, there are many tactical measures which you need to be putting in place, right? And you need to have also proof points that actually make sense. So, I mentioned the example of Procter & Gamble, taking a group of, 100 or maybe even just 50 marketeers and reskilling them, meeting an immediate need in the business is very often, one of the best methods to actually raise awareness of the topic within an organization.
Okay, wonderful. Well, the number one question in the room, at least right now from everyone, is are there certain career paths that you would recommend students consider that would not be impacted by robots?
So I guess I'll ask first a different question, right? Is anything not impacted by smartphones today? And that probably gives you the answer, right? I mean, robots and machine learning and technology more generally is going to impact every job. there won't be any job, and I don't think there is any job right now that is not impacted by technology. So I think the critical thing is not to be trying to avoid technology and avoid the robots, but really understanding, as the point that I was trying to make earlier, understanding how can you work and get the best out of that? How can you actually get to the right outcomes by leveraging technology?
Okay, wonderful. And the second leading question is, people often associate robots with taking blue-collar jobs. How much of a threat are robots to taking white-collar jobs?
Well, I guess I have bad news there, right? So there are a lot of very classic white-collar businesses that are going to have or seeing right now huge impact due to machine learning, robotics. So my wife is a lawyer, and she works in a lot of transactions, M&A, and typically you have due diligence there, right? So you go through huge amounts of documents and data, and that is a typical white-collar activity which can be automated, right? Now, again, the outcome for the client is probably going to be a lot better because there is no way that a human lawyer going through all of the data in a due diligence can actually be that accurate as a machine, doing the same job. So yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of professions which are going to be impacted. I think anywhere where you have a lot of data, those are some of the professions which are going to be impacted first. So you can also think of audit as a good example. And there are several audit companies out there which are really pushing the envelope in terms of new developments there.
Great. So a student question, how is your company socially responsible?
So I think LHH probably has it easy there, right? Because our mission and our purpose is making a difference and helping people make a difference in their careers and get back into a job, helping organizations transform in a positive way. So I would say, the social responsibility is inbuilt into our mission, to our purpose, and to our everyday work.
Mm-hmm. And another student question, and I know Ranjit speaks several languages, so this is a great question, is the ability to speak different languages important to your career in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was mentioning early on when we were sitting with the students over in the other room that most global companies have English as the company language, but a lot of the important things still happens around the water cooler. Talking about technology, you can't have your robot sitting with you at the water cooler, right? And those conversations, that dialogue, that happens in a local language. So my experience has been, and definitely would be my recommendation, the more languages you can, to a limit, but obviously the more languages you can master, the more useful that is for your career.
Right. Okay, I think we may have one more question here. And let's see, so if AI technology is the next big workplace trends, what do you foresee as the big trend after AI is implemented? Or is
oh wow!
is
So I hope I can come back in maybe 10 or 20 years.
Sorry, Ranjit.
to the 23rd of October, right? Detroit Economic Club, and tell you about how I have made a lot of money in the next big trend after AI.
Yes, okay. Great.
So I'm going to have to pass on that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now we have what Steve refers to as the lightning round, just to get to know Ranjit a little bit more personally. So I'm just going to ask you kind of a rapid fire questions here. What is your best sport?
Well, good question. Which is the best sport that I like watching, and which sport am I really good at?
So let's do both.
I'll do both, absolutely. So I'm an avid soccer fan and a hockey fan. Yesterday, the Detroit Red Wings were playing. Fortunately, I was at a dinner with a lot of our valued clients, so I couldn't join that game. But if I would be coming as a tourist for leisure over here, I would definitely be at that game. What sport do I love to do myself? Mm-hmm. Skiing. So I'm a huge skiing fan, so I spend a lot of time on the slopes.
Wonderful. Okay. So share with us something that's on your bucket list.
So many things on my bucket list, but definitely one thing, and that's again relating to skiing. Skiing in the Rockies. I've skied in many, many different places. I've never skied in the Rockies, so that's high on my list.
All right, wonderful. What is the last book that you read?
So and it's probably not a good thing, I always read different books in parallel. So I was reading a fascinating book, or I'm reading a fascinating book by H.R. McMaster. Most people who are familiar with politics will know who that is. Book called Dereliction of Duty. He wrote it probably about a decade ago, I think, and is very insightful in terms of how you can end up making wrong decisions. It's in a very different context in the run-up to the Vietnam War, but I think it is very, very helpful for anybody who's thinking of, how do you get to the right decision? How do you involve the right people? How do you ensure that you don't, ignore the voices of caution? And then I'm reading a book of our very own Vince Molinaro, who's one of our key consultants who helps some of our large customers. And it's all about accountability. Accountability as a leadership team, but also individual accountability as a leader. I think many leaders, sign up to being, a manager, a director, for the wrong reasons, right? And this book is all about, how do you actually make a very conscious decision and understand, the responsibility you have if and when you're a leader.
Right. What is your one of your favorite movies?
Oh, movies, that's
Or
a
song,
hard one.
whichever one you want to do.
Yeah.
Whatever's one easier.
I'll go, well, with the song, I probably would have to pick Eminem if I'm here in Detroit,
okay,
right?
Okay.
But no,
The
movies.
edited version.
I have 3 little kids, right? So I don't have much choice. It's one of the Ice Ages, or my daughters love, my little daughters, they love Peppa Pig. So I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. Not much choice there.
Okay. And I was saying Eminem needs to be edited, right?
Exactly.
For that version. Okay. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Well, probably you will have guessed after all I've been saying about skiing, but it's up in the mountains, in the Swiss mountains, a little hut. And talking about technology, there is no Wi-Fi and there is no cell phone coverage. It's a favorite vacation spot.
Okay, wonderful. Who is a person that you would like to have lunch with?
There are probably many, many people. First and foremost, I would say I need to spend more time having lunch with my wife, probably.
That's a good one.
But that aside, I think there are a lot of fascinating people to have lunch with. I would actually like to be at lunch, a fly on the wall, when you have the President Trump and the Chinese president discussing trade.
Okay, so a fly on the wall. Okay, got it. Okay. All right, so the last question that I have is, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Great question. A lot of advice. I think I would start with, patience is a virtue. So I think when you're 25 or when you're 20, you're very impatient, you want things to happen, and you sometimes believe that things can happen very quickly, and you got to learn to be patient. So that would definitely be one big advice. And the other piece of advice would be, keep on learning. At 25, you might think that you've finished your studies and you basically learned for what you needed for the rest of your life. And that's not true, it's just beginning. So that would be the other advice I would give my younger self.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Ranjit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, folks, October 23rd, 2038, 20 years from now, write it down. We'll see Ranjit right back up here. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for Ranjit de Sousa. Meredith, terrific job. Thank you for being a great presiding officer and all you do for the Detroit Economic Club. I'd also like to echo a thank you for turning on a dime to the MGM Grand Hotel for hosting us, and my amazing DEC staff for making this all happen in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And for you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us on time, every time. This meeting of the Detroit Economic Club is now adjourned. Thank you.